All right, welcome everyone. We're ready to get started. And before I just go through the content of the webinar, we will be recording it. So, and we'll make the recording available at the end of the webinar, probably in a day or two. And we'll send a summary of the webinar. During the webinar, feel free to use the chat to discuss amongst yourselves or share any comments. But if you have specific questions that will be directed to the participants, the panelists, please use the Q&A function, which will then make sure that we can respond to those questions at the Q&A session in the second half of this event. And then, as it says, once if we are unable to answer any of the questions, we'll try to follow up with you, follow-up material. And with that, I would like to welcome all of you to this webinar on equitable wastewater solutions to in disadvantaged rural communities, because this has been a challenging issue in rural communities that rely on distributed infrastructure, primarily on-site septic systems, but sometimes straight piping or other, even challenging sort of forms of infrastructure, which can pose a direct health to public health, direct hazard to public health, individual communities, and the local environment. Before we dive into that, I just wanted to give you a brief introduction to EPIC, the host. This is a rough idea of the staff at EPIC. We are a diverse group of people who work on environmental issues, focusing on innovation and speed, and roughly half our staff work on water issues. Primarily, we do three types of broad processes, three types of things. We do rapid response and analysis. We provide insight on policy issues that are pertinent and relevant. We spend about half our time or more doing the shuttle diplomacy, which is essentially connecting insights from groups of people to other groups of people. So what's relevant in New York and Arizona might be something that Idaho and Alabama might need. So trying to connect those dots is something we love to do. And the last part is sort of unique to our organization. We love to do a lot of experimentation and provide innovative ideas and solutions in the policy space, sometimes running contests, sometimes providing insights and ideas to state agencies and EPA and other federal programs to speed up the process of environmental progress. In terms of our broad policy program areas that we work on, we cover a lot of area on building trust and a lot of issues on drinking water that cover lead in drinking water, financing and affordability broadly. But at the core of it, we do focus on providing equitable solutions to water and wastewater infrastructure problems plaguing many parts of our country. And that sort of guides our work in many of these areas. And today we are fortunate to have an amazing group of panelists who will be talking about infrastructure issues, specifically on wastewater infrastructure in rural communities, and then how states and local programs and federal agencies even might be offering ideas and solutions, and then how they're being implemented at the local level, and what are the challenges that community advocates still face. So today we have 5 amazing panelists: Julie Wachter from Dig Deep, Willie Morgan from CERCAP, Sophie Young from California Strategic Growth Council, Michael Claiborne from the Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, and Colleen Neely, who's an ORISE Fellow at the EPA's Decentralized Wastewater Program. I'm going to turn it over to Julie to start us, and we'll paste the bios for each of the speakers in the chat box. And Julie, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Sri. And thank you to EPIC. I am so honored to be here and excited to be on this panel. The work your organization does is so incredible. And I know that the other people on the panel have really important things to say. So I'm excited to listen in to hear what everyone else says. So I'm going to be focusing my presentation or my angle on the community approaches and how we can use communities, incorporate them into the solutions. Go on to the next one. So 2.2 million Americans, more than 2.2 million Americans lack access to basic plumbing. In some cases, these Americans live in areas where centralized wastewater systems are not technically or economically feasible. which is why on the next slide, we see that nearly a quarter of all wastewater systems in the US are decentralized. I know that's what we're focusing on today. And the reality is that a large number of the policies and the programs in the US are designed for centralized and not decentralized systems. So we do need more support for the decentralized wastewater systems specifically. And one more stat for you all. There is a massive water and sanitation gap in the United States, which is what Dig Deep focuses our work on, helping Americans who don't have access to running water. The unfortunate news is that we identified in a 2019 study that the issue is actually getting worse, not better. So you can see here, communities are facing an $81 billion gap for critical water and infrastructure due to decades of underinvestment. And there are actually communities that are backsliding. So if we don't fix this problem soon, we're going to see this number continuing to grow and the number of people without water and wastewater access declining. So moving on from that, it's a complicated issue. And, I think that before we start with, just the kind of obvious plight that a lot of people can touch on, which is we need more funding. And that's true. There's been decades of underinvestment. But the root causes are a lot more complex. And in order to find the right solutions, I think we need to take time to look at the root causes of the water and wastewater gap that we're seeing. So the reality is that there is funding available that actually isn't reaching the communities that it's designed to help right now. So by looking at these different root causes, we can identify paths forward to make sure that communities are actually able to benefit from the programs that I know a lot of my colleagues are going to talk about. One issue that Dig Deep has noticed is fragmentation between communities that are facing really similar issues. When we put out our 2019 Closing the Water Access Gap report, we heard from a lot of communities around the US saying, I thought I was the only one that didn't have water access, or I thought I was the only one that doesn't have a flush toilet at my house. So the fragmentation between communities, between organizations that are working to solve this crisis that aren't able to find a common space, a common sector to communicate, and even between policymakers and the communities that are impacted by those policies. Another example, I won't touch on all of these, I know there's a lot here, but another thing that I do want to pull out is the one size fits all approach. I think this has probably been successful in reaching the majority of Americans, right, with centralized municipal wastewater treatment systems and even traditional septic tanks. But the reality is that from where we stand now, in order to really solve the gap and make sure that everyone does have the system that they need, we have to get a lot more creative and a lot more innovative. There's a lot of the households that remain without access to adequate sanitation require solutions that are extremely innovative due to their terrain, their geography, their soil type, of course, their household finances, and so many other factors. So we can move on. I could spend probably a day talking about all of these root causes, but those are two that I wanted to focus on first and foremost. So Dig Deep's approach is community-led and community-centered solutions. And I think that that's really important and something that I want to, to make sure that communities have to be part of the solutions and they have to be the driving force behind them. If we start with like I said before, a one size fits all approach, then communities are still going to be left behind, and the solutions won't meet the needs of the community themselves. So some of the ways that we are doing this practically is by endorsing the Wash Act. I don't know if anyone caught that, but the Senators Wyden, Merkley, and Heinrich all put on the Senate floor this week a Wash Act that will develop an accurate count of households lacking complete access to water, clean drinking water and sanitation services, which is a critical issue. I think some of my co-panelists are going to be talking about that as well, but we don't know how many people in the US don't have adequate sanitation. And without knowing that number, it's going to be really hard to help those people and to prioritize underserved communities and disadvantaged communities in our approach. So the WASH Act is really important, really excited about that. We are working together with the US EPA on developing a concierge model for servicing and providing support to communities that really puts the communities first and forms that long-term relationship with communities. We're also working to build a robust WASH sector. So connecting organizations and communities that are working in this area. So one example of that on the next slide is our Decentralized Wastewater Innovation Cohort. You can see we've brought together organizations from across the United States doing similar innovative work in disadvantaged communities and advantaged communities, but communities that have tricky problems solving their, tricky problems with their wastewater treatment. So we've brought those organizations together, and on the next slide, you'll see 4 policy recommendations developed by this cohort, which we'll be presenting to the US EPA and the USDA in an agency roundtable next week that's co-hosted by those agencies, to be able to share out these 4 solutions that we think are going to make a really big impact: developing an accurate count, like I already mentioned, removing the regulatory and eligibility barriers, increasing support for alternative technologies, and of course, investing in long-term relationships with communities. So we're excited about that. It is a closed door meeting, but we'll be sharing out our full policy brief afterwards. And we will provide updates on any action items taken from that Decentralized Wastewater Innovation Cohort. And finally, on the last slide, I think just to turn our attention to the future, we don't have to just focus on the root causes, but when we do focus on them and when we prioritize the methodology that is community-led, community-centered, then we'll see these cascading benefits that not only solves the water and wastewater crisis in the US, but also has all of these additional benefits that can be amplified through the way that we help people get the water and sanitation that they need. So that is Dig Deep's work on the wastewater crisis. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Julie. That was very informative. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Willie Morgan, and I am the state manager for the Southeast Rural Community Assistance Project with our office in South Carolina. And next slide, please. Our organization is part of a national organization or network of regions, and our region is in the Southeast. We cover states all the way from Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Basically, those states that are in the Southeast that are adjacent to the Atlantic Ocean, if you will. And our role is to mainly assist communities with their water and sewer needs. However, we do get into some of the other aspects of their community development activities to address their constituents as well. And we do that largely by providing a lot of training to the leaders of these communities that we serve. In addition to that, the actual staff members who are actually doing some of the field work that are necessary to operate their water and wastewater systems. Next slide, please. What I want to cover first of all, of course, to make sure that everyone understands a little bit about a septic system, which is what we referred to during this discussion today as a decentralized system. And basically you would have, of course, the well associated or the water system associated with providing water to a premise. And following that, of course, the water is used in the premise for various reasons, and there's waste generated from that process. And you have what is called, for a decentralized system, a septic system or septic tank. that captures that water, and there is solids that settle out in that septic tank, and that the liquid portion is passed on to what is called a drain field. For some systems, that may include a distribution box along the way, but a lot of that's going to be dictated by the conditions associated with the property and their location. You have municipalities and things that may dictate various building code requirements, and those things are considered when you're designing and constructing a septic system. Next slide, please. As Julie mentioned, there's about a fourth of the U.S. household that are on septic systems. But one thing I do want to make a point of is the fact that these households, they vary all along the income strata, if you will, as far as having septic systems. Wealthy homeowners have septic systems, as well as very low income homes are associated with septic systems as well. But a third of these new homes that are being constructed, as you see from the slide there, are associated with septic systems in one form or another. Next slide, please. Potential problems with septic systems, of course, is that if they're not maintained properly, they can fail over time and, of course, threaten public health and the environment. Some of the things that you can see on the slide there are associated with failing septic systems is basically ponding in the area where the septic system is located during rainfall events, or separate from rainfall events when it's dry elsewhere on the property. You may see a ponding effect or a damp area on the property, and that's a good indication that the system is failing. If you're mowing the lawn or something like that, and you see the tracks of the wheels associated with the mowing device, lawn mowing device, then that's an indication that there may be problems with the septic system if this is occurring over the area where the septic system is located. One thing that is very clear is that Mother Nature knows no income level in terms of its impact on septic systems. One of my very first decentralized system project that I was involved in was in a wealthy area. And of course, the problem was caused by improper maintenance of the system. And it led to the growth of the trees in the area, the root system associated with those trees, basically destroying the septic system. So it's important to properly maintain septic systems over time, such that they can serve their service life, basically providing service to that premise. Some of the things that you see on the side there are issues associated with failing systems, in addition to what I mentioned earlier about the surface issues that you can encounter. Everything from odors that are associated with wastewater can be detected when you're outside in the area where the septic system is, and water wells that may be in the area can become contaminated. If there's a positive coliform test done on wells and it shows high levels, then that could be an indication of a failing septic system nearby. Next slide, please. As far as the work that's necessary to address failing system, the costs can vary. That can include everything from the location that you're having to deal with, or the specifics of the premise, as far as what that cost may be. And different parts of the system can fail over time as well. Everything from the tank itself, especially if you are having heavy equipment that may go over the tank, that can cause problems, even the collapse of the surface of that tank and having to be required to have that tank replaced. As I mentioned, the distribution box may or may not be present on some systems. It just depends on the logistics of the construction and design of it. But the drain field is a common problem for failing septic systems, mainly because they're not properly maintained in terms of preventing roots and things that may clog the system over time. A new construction may be required, replacement of the entire system, and those costs varies as well, depends on the location and other circumstances that may be associated with that particular premise. Next slide, please. These are some of the potential funding opportunities that are out there to address decentralized systems. All of these are not available for your area. Perhaps there are certain conditions that might prohibit the use of these funds. For example, I know in the state of South Carolina, we have a state constitution prohibition against using public funds for private use. So if you have a failing septic system on a private property, monies that passes through the state or is generated by the state cannot be used to address that matter because of a prohibition that we have in our state constitution. But other funds that potentially could be accessed include such as funds from private entities, other utilities, the electric and gas utilities. Those are entities that can be approached to see if they would be willing to help if state or other governmental funding is not available. Charitable organizations can be another source, and community action agencies and churches are a part of that group. So accessing funding can be challenging in some instances, but it's good to collaborate and reach out to various entities, including other states, to see what opportunities have been tried and used to address some of their issues, which can potentially be used in your situation. Next slide, please. In summary, this is a slide. What I wanted to point out is a situation on a project that I dealt with some years ago. And one of the things, if you look at the picture there, you see the two children who have a remote control vehicle in the center there, and they're basically playing with that remote control vehicle near this storm drain. But that storm drain is receiving some sewage or wastewater that's spilling or being released from a broken line in the neighborhood. So these are some of the concerns that we have to ensure that we properly manage our wastewater, is that you have community activity going on, and you have to be protective of children or other individuals who may come in contact with wastewater, and it can cause health problems that probably is unnecessary if the wastewater is properly managed. But it's important to protect the system and manage it properly, and make sure that proper maintenance is done on the system, whether it's a decentralized system or if it's a municipal system providing the wastewater service. And educating the community about the need to properly maintain the system is important. And that's one of the things that our organization has been trying to do, not only with the leaders of the communities and the workers of the water and wastewater systems, but also community individuals, such that they can be aware of what dangers that are out there. And with that, I do thank you for your time, and I'll be here to answer any questions later. Thank you.
Thank you. So my name is Michael Claiborne. I'm a directing attorney for Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability, and very happy to be here. Thank you to Epic for inviting us to attend this seminar and to speak. This is an issue that we care a lot about and unfortunately ends up playing, I think, second tier or second fiddle to questions or policy conversations around access to safe and affordable drinking water. So I'm glad we're focused on wastewater today. For those of you who do not know Leadership Council, we're an environmental and social justice nonprofit based in California's San Joaquin and East Coachella Valleys. And we work with or alongside disadvantaged communities, generally low-income communities of color in both valleys in California, on issues that include access to safe and affordable drinking water and safe wastewater infrastructure, along with housing and air quality and a bunch of other issues that are impacting communities that we work with. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm going to start by talking about two communities that we work with, both of which are facing wastewater issues, and talk a little bit about the impacts of those issues, as well as what residents are doing to try to address these problems that their communities are facing. The first community I'd like to talk a little bit about is Oasis Mobile Home Park. This is a mobile home park in the eastern Coachella Valley. It's near the north shore of the Salton Sea. For those of you who have been in the Coachella Valley, it's a region that gets very, very hot in the summer. There are severe both drinking water and wastewater problems throughout the valley. And Oasis Mobile Home Park is one pretty severe example of the issues that we see in many mobile home parks in the area. I think this example demonstrates why we care as an organization and as a community-based organization about these issues, and how inadequate wastewater infrastructure can impact the people who live in communities like Oasis Mobile Home Park. I have two pictures here. One is of a wastewater spill in 2020. These are pretty common in Oasis Mobile Home Park, and I should say this is home to about between 1,000 and 1,500 people, so definitely not a small park. It's served by a series of 90 septic tanks, according to US EPA, which is pretty uncommon in situations that I've seen. I haven't seen that many septic tanks serving so many households in such a small area, but they're all very old, inadequately maintained, and many of those are failing. So you see spills like this pretty frequently. And as you can see, they're very near households. These are areas where kids play, where people walk to work, where they commute, where they go outside to get out of the heat. It can get very, very hot in the region, up to 120 degrees in the summer pretty regularly. So people are outside commonly, and the exposure to these wastewater spills is absolutely a public health hazard. So we looked at these issues along with some partners in a health impact assessment that we completed in 2019. And what we found that health impacts related to inadequate septic systems and wastewater systems include increased risk of exposure to soil pathogens, increased risk of exposure to nitrate in drinking water, stress and anxiety, increased illness or infection. And also one thing that we hear a lot from residents is just decreased ability for economic impact activity and community development opportunities. And one other thing to note about Oasis Mobile Home Park, it's pretty common for issues around wastewater to go hand in hand with other issues like access to safe drinking water. The park at Oasis Mobile Home Park is plagued by arsenic issues at about 10 times the drinking water limit, and also has some cross-contamination with the wastewater system, given that the drinking water distribution system is also very old and inadequately maintained. Let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit about Lanier, which is a small rural community in Fresno County in the San Joaquin Valley. There's two pictures here. One is of the Lanier Community Center, which is the one kind of public area where people can gather in Lanier. And the other is of a community advocate named Juventino. And this is actually a picture taken at a celebration for some policy change that we got in California around access to safe drinking water. And I included that picture because I think sometimes in these discussions, we lose sight of the people who live in communities, and also the kind of the beauty and strength that we see in disadvantaged low-income communities in rural areas in the San Joaquin Valley. So a little bit about the wastewater problems in Lanier. It's a community that's served by a small water system that has had issues, but no sewer system. So it's all septic tanks serving the approximately 150 households throughout the community. This is a fairly old community, so the septic tanks are generally 50, 60 years old, past really their useful life, and have had some maintenance issues given that this is a very low income community, primarily a majority Latino community and very low income. So residents identified access to wastewater, adequate wastewater infrastructure as a priority going back to about 10 years ago. And they identified a couple of solutions that they'd want to see to address these problems. One is that they saw a need for interim solutions, so support for septic maintenance and repair while they worked on a long-term solution. And then they wanted to explore extension of sewer service from a nearby community called Riverdale, which is about 3 miles up the road. When they started talking to Fresno County about the interim solutions, there were some concerns expressed from the county about the cost of those solutions. So there was never put in place any kind of interim solution to help people with septic pump outs or repairs while they worked on a long-term solution. So that's one problem that folks have seen. The second is just the timeline for a long-term solution at sewer extension. They faced a lot of challenges going for state revolving funds. And I know I'm going to run out of time here. So I'll just say it took a very long time and we're not done with this the sewer extension project. Let's go to the next slide. 3 different policies that we're working on, either implementing or passing in California that could help. One is SB 1215. It was a bill passed, authored by Senator Hertzberg in 2019, and it allows the regional water quality control boards in California to order extension of wastewater service to communities served by failing septic tanks or on-site wastewater treatment facilities. And that bill is in early stages of implementation, has been really useful in moving conversations around voluntary extension of service forward. Second bill is SB 222. This is a bill that's being considered by the legislature this year that we're sponsoring, authored by Senator Dodd, and it would provide low-income rate assistance to those served by wastewater systems as well as drinking water systems, and can help with septic to sewer projects when you're talking about affordability of those projects once they're complete. And then finally, just to note, the State Water Board in California is conducting a wastewater needs assessment to look at needs around septic to sewer projects, septic maintenance, et cetera, statewide. I think this is really important, both to better use the funding sources and policy tools we have now, but also to show where there are gaps in funding or policy that need to be addressed. So that'll be very exciting work. I think they're working with UCLA and some other researchers on that. So very excited to see the results there. And I'll close there and just say I'll stick around for questions. And this has been great. Good to talk to you all.
Great, thank you. Hi, everyone. My name is Sophie Young. I work for the California Strategic Growth Council, and thanks to Epic and everyone else for having us here today. It's been really inspiring to hear about all the work that you have been doing. I will speak to a perspective from a state climate resilience funding perspective and the barriers that we faced in expanding our program to unincorporated and rural communities in this latest funding round. For those of you who aren't familiar, SGC, or Strategic Growth Council, is a state entity in California comprised of 7 state agencies and 3 public members. And we are tasked with advancing interagency work around California's climate, transportation, equity, economic development, and conservation goals. And we do this through interagency coordination and a portfolio of programs and investments. And this position allows us to work in communities to identify and incubate models and scale them through our whole of government council agencies. Next slide, please. So to introduce you to our program, Transformative Climate Communities, or TCC, We are a place-based program that supports community-led climate resilience and transformation projects in the most disadvantaged communities. And we fund community-driven proposals, which are structured to provide existing residents and stakeholders with the tools and resources to drive that change. And on the right, you'll see an image of the community visioning and planning process that we support. We make significant investments to support the deployment of multiple integrated climate and sustainability strategies and projects carried out through this transformational planning process and multi-sectoral partnerships. And we do this through implementation grants in the order of 10 to 66 million and planning grants in the order of $100 to $200,000. Next, please. So to show you what a project really looks like on the ground, on the right is actually a project that we did fund in Ontario, California. And participants select a collection of climate resilience projects that will improve their livelihoods of the communities in ways that are meaningful. So the projects are both sustainable, but also they are intended to be integrated with one another and to connect residents to other community assets. So we're kind of like a one-stop shop for sustainability projects. And every grant includes multiple projects within a project area at the neighborhood scale, so about 5 square miles. In addition, one of the more unique aspects of our program is that we fund what we call transformative elements or social resilience projects to ensure that these physical infrastructure projects have meaningful and direct benefits. So what that looks like is we fund community engagement plans, jobs training, to prepare residents for future jobs in a net zero economy. Oops, my screen went black. Hold on a second. Sorry, okay, we're back. And also co-planning for anti-displacement, taking into account that there could be displacement impacts from a large infrastructure investment. Next slide. So here are maps of our statewide investments. We've invested in 26 communities. On the left are the implementation grants, on the right are planning grants. And wanted to point out that we prioritize our investments based on California's EnviroScreen tool, which is an environmental justice tool that has mapped all of the census tracts and assigned socioeconomic and pollution burden scores to each of those. So you can see here that the ones in yellow are the top 25%, red are the top 10% of the most disadvantaged communities, and a large portion are in the San Joaquin Valley, as Michael just explained. Next slide, please. So in 2019, Senate Bill 351 required our program to open up eligibility to unincorporated areas. And this was a pretty challenging assignment for us as the program framework focuses on climate resilience infrastructure, but a lot of it is contingent on having basic infrastructure. And of course, these resilience investments are much needed by unincorporated communities. But many of the challenges that are faced by these communities, as you all know, are systemic political, data representation, and basic water and wastewater infrastructure challenges, many of which exceeded the sphere of our investments. But we worked with partners to develop an investment framework to ensure that this investment would be sustained and have a meaningful impact and also uplift the communities we're intending to serve. Next slide. So we actually partnered with the Leadership Council, who you just heard from, and other partners to identify meaningful points of entry to begin to address these challenges within our program. We underwent a year-long research and consultation process, and we convened a working group of 20 members that included state agencies that oversee basic infrastructure, local counties, and community-based organizations. And we connected and Leadership Council helped to connect SGC with residents and key stakeholders to ensure all recommendations were ground truthed. Next. So I probably don't need to go over these key challenges as others have, but we also came to some of the same conclusions that through our research and consultation, and the process revealed a stark lack of environmental infrastructure, data representation, political and capacity challenges. And then something particular to California is the legislative oversight, which was lacking around a lot of the wastewater programs. Next slide. So one of the biggest undertakings that we had was to provide data representation. We created a mapping tool, which I can't really get into the weeds of that right now, but for representing those disadvantaged unincorporated communities. You'll see that yellow and blue are the existing mapping tools that are available in California. And we also went through a density analysis to identify additional communities in pink of unincorporated communities to provide eligibility for our program. And then we also ground truth this with communities. Next slide. So this is the pilot investment framework that we are pursuing in this next round of guidelines. One is, we understand that water and wastewater funding is difficult to obtain, and in our program that needs to be done alongside our resilience investments. So we actually added a new budget allocation of 10% of the award for funding water and wastewater connections. We also developed a funding resource list that included funding of resources for both centralized and decentralized water and wastewater connections. In addition to providing the mapping tool, we also provided a flexible eligibility method for communities to self-identify as unincorporated communities that are disadvantaged and eligible for our funding. And then lastly, we expanded our technical assistance program to focus on disadvantaged unincorporated communities and ensured that our technical assistance providers had the expertise to help with rural environmental infrastructure issues. Next slide. So in closing, we are piloting this framework as we speak. We just released our funding round, and we will continue to monitor these newly implemented measures in this next round of funding and adjust the program over the next 3 years. And if these pilot measures are successful, we hope that they will positively impact broader state policies by providing a model for opening up pathways for meaningful investment in disadvantaged unincorporated communities. Next slide. Thank you very much for having us.
Thank you, Sophie. My name is Colleen Neely. I'm an ORISE fellow supporting the EPA's Decentralized Wastewater Program, which is within the Office of Wastewater Management. And so I'm going to touch on 2 core topics today. The first is data and data gaps with respect to understanding the prevalence of decentralized systems across the US. And I saw some questions in that regarding that in the chat. So hopefully I can share some things useful to you. And the second topic is focused on decentralized financing and the Clean Water SRF. So to explore these 2 topics, I'm going to review highlights from a 2021 report to Congress, as well as a decentralized financing guide that the Decentralized program released in February this year. Next slide. Diving in, I'm going to give some brief background on the EPA's Decentralized Wastewater Program, just so you have some context on how our program broadly engages in this space. And so the Decentralized program was established in the early 2000s in order to provide non-regulatory support to homeowners, to counties, and to states. And to provide this support, the program formed an MOU partnership with 20 other organizations. And during the last partnership renewal, the partners agreed on 5 priority areas. And these priority areas also drive the direction of the program. So I'm going to share them. So the first one is to promote the benefits of advanced decentralized treatment technologies, to increase outreach and education on decentralized systems, as well as the maintenance, and to identify and utilize current information and data on the use and performance of decentralized systems. And the fourth is to share information on decentralized financing and funding. And lastly, to expand mechanisms to address workforce, education, training, as well as research needs in the decentralized industry. Next slide. Okay, so now pivoting to the topics of decentralized data and financing. As I mentioned, in 2021, the Decentralized program released a report to Congress answering two questions. The first is about the prevalence of low and moderate income households that lack access to treatment works. And the second question is related to how states use the Clean Water SRF to finance decentralized projects. So on the left, the program found and reported that there are no national data sets that exist to provide a comprehensive answer to the prevalence of low and moderate income households that lack access to treatment works, or in other words, homes that could be on septic systems or no systems at all, perhaps. But using the best available national data that does exist through the American Housing Survey, households earning less than or equal to the median household income are 10% more likely to lack access to treatment works compared to those earning greater than the median household income. And so to the second question related to the SRF, only 26 states actually have ever used the Clean Water SRF for decentralized projects. And of those, only 5 states or 5 states account for 75% of that funding that has gone to decentralized projects. So this information shows us two important things, I think. First, that we need a more complete understanding of wastewater infrastructure access. And that's important so there can be strategic outreach and support to communities that lack wastewater infrastructure access. And second, that we have a largely untapped resource, the Clean Water SRF, to help finance wastewater infrastructure gaps. Next slide, please. And I want to quickly show two graphs here that are from that report to Congress. On the left, we have the historic usage of the Clean Water SRF for decentralized projects. And on the right, it's the cumulative state usage of the Clean Water SRF for decentralized projects. And I wanted to show these because I think it drives home the opportunities to expand the Clean Water SRF more broadly across the nation, but also in individual states. Next slide. In direct response to what is clearly an untapped resource to fund decentralized projects, in February of this year, the program published a guide to help state SRF administrators, to help community leaders understand how the Clean Water SRF can be leveraged to finance decentralized projects. So to do this, the guide covers 4 broad topics. First, it just provides an overview of the Clean Water SRF program, but also provides specifics related to decentralized systems, meaning eligible borrowers and eligible projects. Then it covers the decentralized financing mechanisms, kind of the meat. And the guide includes a number of case studies for each mechanism. And then the guide also shares strategies and options for loan repayment, as that's often a barrier to the SRF. And finally, to tie all this information together, the guide lays out a framework to help communities systematically move from the point of project identification and conceptualization to actually being able to execute through using an innovative financing mechanism with the Clean Water SRF. Next slide, please. So touch on what those mechanisms are that are identified and included in the guide. So the first one is direct loans to system owners. And this is rare. Delaware is the only state to do this. The second, which is more common, is conduit lending, which uses an intermediary to facilitate lending. The third type included in the guide is financing through the creation and funding of a sub-state revolving fund that can be the one to administer then directly to system owners. And for this sponsorship, this one is not used for decentralized at present, but it's where a public borrower, perhaps a wastewater utility, funds or sponsors a decentralized project under their own SRF loan. And the last is co-financing. This is essentially where where SRF funds are paired with funds from other state or federal financing programs. And the map here we have just shows the spread of how conduit and sponsorship mechanisms are used across the US. And we can see there's a lot of states that don't have a pin in it indicating a financing mechanism. So that just shows how much opportunity there is across the US to figure out how we can more effectively use SRFs for decentralized. Next slide, please. So out. We talked about data. We talked about funding as elements to closing the wastewater infrastructure gap. Data can help us understand where septic systems are located and the prevalence of failing system or where no infrastructure exists at all. And we talked about leveraging the clean water SRF to fund and finance projects in these communities. But data and funding alone don't solve the problem, as the other speakers pointed out. That there's a critical third element, community engagement and local partnership. And there's really a need for partners to help connect communities to sources of funding and financing that can help them address their wastewater infrastructure needs. So, in closing, I'll just say, the EPA, our decentralized wastewater program, will continue to support and facilitate across these three areas. And we really look forward to further and future conversations and the works from the folks on this call, to our common goal of helping close the infrastructure gap and making sure everyone has safe and accessible and functioning wastewater systems. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Colleen. That was really amazing presentations from everyone talking about different aspects of this issue from regional to national perspectives. And I've been noting that chat has been exceedingly active with lots of people chiming in with questions, ideas, and thoughts. I tried to gather some of them, and hopefully people will continue to use the Q&A format, which allows us to read the questions. I won't be able to follow the chat anymore as I'm talking. But I noted down a few questions, and I thought I'll start with some from there, and then we'll open up to the audience more directly. Dave Smith pointed out that many state programs are not set up to serve individual homes, and I think this is something that Willie also mentioned in his example of the restrictions, for example, in the state of South Carolina. Colleen, you mentioned a lot of the SRF programs that states are using. So I feel like that sort of somewhat answered the question. But there was another question on a related topic, which you briefly touched upon, which was on data. And Justin Overton asked, is there a map of all septic systems? Is there, I have an answer to this, but I thought you let you respond. How do you see EPA's role in gathering the data and really making that available to states and local systems? And I'm also curious to see what Sophie thinks about how the data mapping projects that they have done sort of helps or participates in that process.
Shri, was that for me to start off?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Sure. Yeah, there's a number of different ways that I'm aware of that folks are going about answering this question of data and understanding where systems are, but I'll answer from the perspective of what the EPA is doing at present. So as I mentioned, there's no national surveys that provide comprehensive information about the prevalence of septic systems across the US. So in 2018, the EPA actually submitted a proposal to the Census Bureau to develop a question related to septic system use. So this question would be a part of the American Community Survey. And for those that perhaps are not familiar with that survey, just very quickly, the American Community Survey is the survey that provides us a lot of information on demographic information, housing, social, and economic information from a variety or from a number of households across the US. And so the question that we propose to the Census Bureau, it is actively being field tested. And if the field testing goes well, and it's expected to be included in the 2025 American Community Survey with results in 2026, which I know sounds a long ways away, but we submitted the question in 2018, so we're maybe kind of in the home stretch. But I think this having this kind of information is critically important. because we then can have an understanding of where septic systems exist across the US and direct outreach and funding to those communities. So thanks, Shri, and to the person who asked that question.
Sophie, did you have anything on the state mapping in California? Is that something are you headed in that direction, or is that too much of a challenge to take on at this point?
Yeah, I think we'll see how this mapping exercise goes. I will say that our mapping was of the communities themselves who don't even show up, and not the septic systems. We don't do that, but it has provided, I think, more data visibility and has shown some of the gaps. I think the challenge really is with these communities that they don't, they are hard to count in the first place. And so, there's not even like a data, statewide database on this, but I think that our efforts to at least provide some visibility through a methodology that we developed, could be taken up by some of these other agencies with more statewide reach to be able to provide that visibility and eligibility for them in the future. So that's kind of how we are hoping that we will be able to influence the process.
Thanks. Thanks, Sophie. I'm going to now read a couple of questions from the Q&A. Mark Elliott is asking about Alabama and his experience working there, with many communities not being able to afford even the basic, O&M costs. This is probably a question for Willie and Julie, for everyone on the panel, but specifically for Willie and Julie. In terms of the community work that you have done, Willie, you specifically mentioned, the restrictions on some of the state funding, and so scrounging up federal dollars and other programs. So how is it realistically possible for communities to transition from, existing non-functional or poorly functional septic systems to anything? Could be better septic systems, could be a sewer connection, other forms of treatment works that really make sure that residents can manage those, payments and maintenance beyond.
Well, as far as failing systems, if it's a community issue, one of the things that we have tried to do is to collaborate with the existing nearby utilities to try to see if there's an opportunity to make plans to install a municipal system or extend the municipal system collection system to accommodate that particular community. But as far as individual failing systems within a community and expansion of an existing sewer system is not available, at least in the interim, then we look to some of the private sources for funding. As I showed on the slide there, the listing of the charitable organizations, the community action agencies, and churches are the first group we start looking at. But beyond that, it's a little difficult, and we don't really have that solution to those types of situations where they're not able to get funding from those sources.
Yeah, Will, I'm glad you mentioned that, and it's a really challenging issue. So thanks. I forget who asked that, but thank you for bringing that up. I think this is something that is very, very important. Operation and maintenance of decentralized wastewater systems is critical, and it's not necessarily well addressed by existing funding programs from the federal or state governments. So at this point, Dig Deep sees the role of nonprofits as stepping in. So, like Dig Deep has a program, for example, where we are helping with that in the areas that we're working, which are unfortunately limited, but we are working on Navajo Nation in West Virginia and in Texas at the moment. So in those areas, we're trying to provide the support we can, but we also recognize that that's not a long-term solution. We need government funding to become more flexible to account for operation and maintenance, or else, like I mentioned earlier, we're going to see more backsliding where people that have access right now to effective wastewater systems, especially as we see the effects of climate change and other things, those are going to age out, those are going to fail for various reasons, and people might not have the funds to repair them. And this is another reason why I think it's important to have a kind of one government approach I'm sure that, Colleen and others working in various federal programs might be able to point to specific federal or state or local level opportunities where, there's a local nonprofit or federal kind of funding that will address this in some specific instances. But the reality is that most people, most water operators, most homeowners that are already maybe struggling to, balance their time and their finances don't have the time to explore all of these various programs offered by the government. So I think it's important for funding programs to reach out to homeowners, to communities, rather than putting that burden on, a homeowner to try to explore the website or navigate the difficult, eligibility requirements.
Thanks, Julie. I have a question from Joko Schneider, and this is, I'm directing this to Michael, but others feel free to chime in. His question was about mobile home parks typically don't have septic, and this is something that I noticed in my conversations with a lot of state agencies because of the way mobile home parks have distributed ownership between subsurface land and above ground. So the house is separate from the land. And so because most septic systems go underground, like how is it in California where mobile home parks are allowed to have, septic systems in close proximity, essentially 90, 100 systems in one lot?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question and one that I only partially know the answer to. So what I do know is I work with a lot of mobile homes and residents, well, really residents of mobile home parks that are served by septic systems or on-site wastewater treatment systems. What I don't know is under California or federal law, whether that's actually permissible. And the reason I don't know that is a lot of the mobile home parks I'm working with, especially in the Eastern Coachella Valley, are unpermitted. So they are parks where somebody purchased land and decided to allow people to rent spaces on that land, but never actually went through any process to permit those parks. And so often what we see are kind of duct tape systems made with PVC pipe that somebody just kind of put together in the backyard or on a property that were never permitted and may not actually be permissible under state or federal law. So I don't know the answer to it. I think it's a really good question. And there are its own set of challenges when it's a mobile home park that's served by these failing on-site wastewater treatment facilities, including things like, can the state pay for improvements, or should the state pay for improvements when the mobile home park's owned by a corporation that could otherwise afford to pay for the improvements? A lot of kind of thorny policy issues that we've tried to work through that I think are still ongoing.
Right. There's another question from Sue Chen-Fu on cesspools. And I know some states are still like replacing them. I think we spoke to Delaware recently, and they mentioned that they still have, a small set of cesspools that they discover, and their financing program covers that. Is that something that any of the panelists have encountered in projects or areas? Julie's smiling, so I'm guessing there's something there. But and I know that that's a big problem in Hawaii. So if anybody wants to chime in on issues related to cesspools.
Yeah, I know I saw two colleagues that are working at VI, which is an organization based in Hawaii that is part of our Dig Deep's Decentralized Wastewater Innovation Cohort. And they were instrumental in helping craft some of these policy recommendations based on their experience with the cesspool issue. I think it was mentioned in the chat that there are 88,000 cesspools across the Hawaiian Islands, dumping 53 million gallons of wastewater into the ocean every day. So I don't know if you can bring up either Stuart Coleman or Joaquin Yoko, but I know they would be able to speak to this a lot better than I could about the cesspool issue.
Is Stuart or Yoko available to speak? Anything about cesspools? We can bring them up. Lena, if that's possible. We'll look at that before, and then we'll probably move to the next question. I received a question. Oh, there's Yoko.
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate the opportunity to talk. Basically, yeah, in Hawaii, we're not even at that stage yet where we have a problem with septic tanks because we have a problem with cesspools. And septic tanks certainly aren't going to be the solution because, as you all know, they don't really deal with nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus. And so we want to leapfrog septic systems. We want to go straight from having 88,000 cesspools to having 88,000 homes connected to something better than septic. So we're looking at nitrogen removing systems such as the layer cake model or constructed wetlands, or even better, going to community scale systems that are able to do, R1 water or reusable water, because we also have, or we're running into a freshwater crisis here in Hawaii where we're just running out of fresh water. So all these island problems are demanding innovative solutions, and we're excited to tackle them. So yeah, VI is the name of the nonprofit. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to just Google VI Clean Water and you'll find us. Thank you.
Thanks, Echo. We have a question from my old friend, Scott Cuppet from New York State. And he is asking about, this correlation between failing septic systems and income, and, are we running out of soils where we are citing these systems? I have an anecdotal response, and I don't know if anyone on the panel has a more pointed, specific response. Is that in my previous study in Ohio, I did notice that the percentage of soils that are suitable for septic systems are predominantly taken up by agriculture and other urban housing and community development, enough that scale of the soils that is available for well-functioning systems has actually reduced. So leaving less and less amount of good soils for siting these septic systems. So any systems that are being installed now are installed in poor quality soils, and so they do require additional treatment capacity, or additional depth, or higher levels of sophistication. But I'm wondering if there is anything that's any other experience that others on the panel have.
Well, just keep in mind the POTWs, they are expanding their systems as well, thus taking out some of the need for some of the septic systems that are in place or may have been contemplated. So communities are going more toward the POTWs, and that's assisting that effort.
Right. That's definitely playing a role. And I should also point out, I think based on census data, overall number of septic systems are declining, even though there are new systems that are coming online. A lot more systems, as Willie pointed out, are being replaced by community-based, wastewater treatment systems, more centralized treatment, which reduces the scale of the problem a little bit, but it just shifts them from one location to another, and still does not address some of the more persistent problems in rural communities, more low-income, disadvantaged communities that people here have experience dealing with, and I think that's certainly true. Just going to look up some more questions. There's one which is a little more intricate, so I'm just throwing it out. Maybe this is for Colleen. Given the health problems, we need solutions to scale. Plenty of ACOs and payers are currently investing in affordable housing, food access, and seeing huge returns in investments in the form of lower healthcare costs. Curious if anyone has tried the same strategy, the one health, one water type solution, where everything is connected, and so benefits that come from better wastewater treatment can be captured in some way and used to pay for these investments. Anyone on the panel, maybe Sophie, something this is as the state thinks about financing these programs, like that's something I see you at least thinking about these questions, are thinking about models of how this could be implemented in water and wastewater, where we know that this has been done in healthcare and other sectors, at least on an experimental basis.
I would have to defer to the other experts here since this is not our area of expertise, and we are looking for these types of models to be able to share with our grantees.
Yeah, it's a great question, and I don't necessarily have a solution from a specific funding perspective, but one of the other elements of research that Dig Deep does, so we do research in addition to our program, our programs that help people get water and wastewater access. And one of the areas that we are about to be publishing some recent research on is the overall impact of not having access to water, wastewater. And the reality is that we found is a nearly 5-to-1 return on investment. So for every dollar spent on water and wastewater provision for people who don't have adequate access at the moment, the economic benefits to the society at large are 5-to-1, so $5 return. So I think what that tells us, and why it's important to, why I'm bringing that up in relation to your question, is that we need to stop seeing water and wastewater investments as needing to be, needing to be viable in terms of rate payment and user payments, that they have to be able to be, the costs have to be recouped. That's kind of an older way of thinking. And as we move forward, we need to realize that society at large is benefiting, not just in terms of human rights and as a justice and racial justice and DEI issue, but also in terms of the economy. The economy is losing millions of dollars because we are struggling with this water access and wastewater access gap. So I know you were asking specifically about ways to, kind of move funds around and realize the benefits in one area to fund work in another area, but I do think it's an important way of looking at this. This is one issue, and it's so interrelated to the health of the entire economy.
Thanks, Julie. I marked this as a tough question that stumped the panel. If Jeff from Washington State is available, I thought he might have some particular insights on how the state has been running their program on financing financing septic systems through the state revolving fund, and we'll try to bring Jeff to the panel if he's available to speak a little bit about the program, because I feel like that's a unique sort of innovative way the state has been trying to provide financing to a wide range of customers, break some of the limits that existing programs have, and run a successful model. Jeff.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great. I'm not used to this format. Yeah, so Washington State had a bit of a milestone this last year. We were doing local loan programs through contracting requests from counties for on-site septic repair and replacement, which we'd been doing with our Clean Water State Revolving Fund program actually for quite a long time as loan only, and in a handful of Puget Sound counties, and that was in the 90s. And we've over time added eligibility for state grants, and we've been using access to the forgivable principal that's now available through the Clean Water State Revolving Fund to set up a program that has a wide range. It's still a loan program that we run through a contract with a not-for-profit lending institution, a CDFI in Washington State, that's pretty active on environmental water quality related protection. And that program over the last 5 to 7 years has really expanded. All the counties in Washington State have said they want to be part of it. We have an MOU set up with all the county health departments for on-site septic repair and replacement loan program, and Craft 3 is the CDFI that we contract with, that's providing that service statewide at this point. We're kind of moving into that statewide model. And so anyway, the program is working very well. We just awarded an additional 10 to 12 million into that program for this kind of next two-year cycle to see how that works. And it's a combination of Clean Water State Revolving Fund loan, forgivable principal, and state grant dollars, about half and half funded grant and loan. And the program provides loans, and CRAFT 3 revolves the grant money is used to continue to revolve that program. So they have basically a baseline of funding as well as the additional funds that we put into the program. And because of the grant and forgivable, there's the ability for them to offer loans at the point at the low end of no payments at all until the property changes hands, up to a standard rate for those that can economically qualify for a standard loan. So anyway, it's working well. Our model does rely on an active community development financial institution lender to make it work, and we have that benefit here. But I know those organizations are across the country, and hopefully, I keep hoping some states have a CDFI that's willing to step in and start promoting a program like this, because it works pretty well.
Thank you, Jeff. Thanks. Appreciated it.
Yeah.
And these are, there are different models, as Colleen presented in her slide. There are different models of states trying to have financing programs. And that was the beginning of our work on this, was to understand how different states are setting up their programs. And we've been interviewing at Epic. We've done several interviews with state agency folks, community advocates. And that's how I met all these, smart, dedicated folks. And we thought this would be a chance to scope out and provide a broader perspective on this issue, rather than just focus on the financing programs run by states, but also understand the community level aspect of how different communities are facing these problems, and how advocacy groups are, for instance, the discussion in Hawaii was eye-opening for us in terms of how they're trying to, from the ground up, working to advocate for state legislation, state financing on these issues, and trying to do this leapfrog from cesspools to more advanced systems. And we thought that this would be a great way to inform the public, get some feedback, and I agree with the sentiment shared by somebody on the chat that we should try to save this chat. There's just lots of cool links and relevant context that I think will definitely inform a lot of the work done by people on the panel, but definitely on other advocates as well. I want to thank all of you for spending this time. Thank the panelists for presenting their deeply relevant and highly motivating work that they've been doing in the communities, and definitely thank all the people for talking, listening, but also sharing their ideas and questions. And if there were any unresolved questions, we'll try to respond to that in our follow-up email. And we'll have a recording of this chat, which I think should not be a challenge, but if it is, we certainly have the presentation that we will share with you, and a brief summary of the discussion. And I thank everyone. Thank you for your time, and have a good rest of the day and a good end of the week. Thank you so much.